Dry Creek, Colorado, in the spring of 1884 was a place where dust clung to your bones and judgment clung tighter. The wind carried grit sharp enough to sting your eyes, and so did the stares of the townsfolk. The land was hard, but the people were harder. And in a weather-beaten shack at the edge of town, too far for charity, too close for comfort, Ellen Braithwaite stood at the woodpile splitting logs with hands that had forgotten softness. The sky was the color of old tin, flat and pitiless. No sign of rain. No kindness either. Her knuckles were raw, not just from the axe, from scrubbing, hauling, holding back grief. A baby cried from inside the house, then another picked up the sound, then another. All four of them hers, all under the age of 7, all with their father's dark hair and none of his steady hands. He'd left at the first hard frost when the potatoes rotted in the ground, rode off to Denver chasing some promise he hadn't even had the decency to name. The church ladies called it abandonment. The men down at the mill just called her bad luck. They whispered in the pews and stared in the dry goods store, never saying her name but saying plenty else. That she'd married wrong, that she'd driven him off, that it served her right anyway, a girl like that, and weren't those babies a burden on the whole town? Ellen didn't argue. She didn't cry. Not in front of them. She worked. She'd taken in laundry-stitched seams for farm wives too proud to mend their own drawers. She had done what needed doing. She had begged exactly once when the youngest took fever in February and the doctor hadn't come. Said he was busy. Said maybe she should pray harder. So she stopped asking. That was mercy in its own cold way. A wind picked up now, tugging the edge of her skirt, lifting the dry smell of sage and soot from the stove inside. She paused, her chest tight, eyes closed. For a second she let herself imagine something else, a different life, a softer one. Then the axe slipped in her grip, glancing off the knot in the log, slicing the heel of her palm. Blood welled. She bit down a sound and pressed her apron against the wound. Behind her a door creaked open. "Mama," it was June, the oldest, with hair like thistle fluff and a voice already too steady for her age. "Go back in, love. Mind your brothers." June hesitated, bare feet dusted in ash. She was the only one old enough to remember when the house had been full of music and boots, stomping and laughter, full of promises whispered between kisses, when the nights were long and the hearth still warm. "Mama, he's not coming back, is he?" Ellen didn't answer. She just looked at the horizon. Past the town, past the valley, past the empty stretch of land that had swallowed her husband whole. "No," she said finally, the word a stone in her throat. "He's not." June nodded like she'd known all along. Ellen turned away so her daughter wouldn't see her cry. A crow called from the cottonwood tree beyond the fence, black as coal against the gray sky. There were no neighbors to hear it. Only the wind. Only the children. And the ache in Ellen's chest, a raw thing that never quite healed. Not when she sat alone by the fire. Not when she stitched by candlelight until her eyes blurred. Not when she held her youngest through coughing fits, praying to a God she no longer trusted. She didn't want saving. Not anymore. But something had to change. Even the earth knew that, how it split open in spring, even under a sky that hadn't rained in weeks. Things grew or they died. That was the rule. She dropped the bloodied rag into the basin by the door and took a shallow breath. Let the town whisper. Let them call her what they would. Her children needed milk. Her body needed rest. But what she needed, what she could barely name, was a moment of mercy. Some sign that the whole world hadn't gone hollow. She didn't know it yet, but that sign was riding into town that very morning. A man with a limp in his right leg, a horse that had seen better years and a reputation just as battered as hers. He didn't come looking for redemption, but he'd find it all the same. Before the war, Elijah Carter had been a preacher's son with clean hands and an eye for book. After he was a man shaped by fire and loss, and the road had taken more from him than it ever gave back. He rode into Dry Creek the way he did, everything quiet, careful, and with no expectation of welcome. His horse, a graying roan named Silas, favored the left leg same as him. They moved at the same pace, slow but steady. Elijah's coat was threadbare at the cuffs, dust climbing the collar. In his saddlebag he carried a pocket Bible with pages missing and a folded letter he hadn't read in 3 years. The town hadn't changed much. Still just the one main street with its leaning hitching posts and peeling white church. The general store, the saloon, the blacksmith, all of them still there like ghosts that hadn't figured out they were dead yet. He wasn't planning to stay. Just a meal, maybe a bed, if the money stretched far enough. He dismounted in front of the feed store, stretching his back until something popped in his shoulder. An old man sweeping the porch gave him a glance, then looked away quick. That was fine. Inside, the air smelled of kerosene and grain. The girl behind the counter couldn't have been more than 17. Her eyes landed on Elijah's limp, then darted away like she'd seen something shameful. He asked for oats. Paid in coin that left him with barely enough for dinner. "You ain't from here," the girl said. "Not a question." "No." "You stayin' long?" "Not if I can help it." She didn't smile. Outside, the wind had picked up. He could taste the storm in it, dry and sharp the way it gets when weather's coming that won't bring relief. He took Silas around back and fed him from a trough, watching the hills through the cracks in the fence. That's when he saw her. A woman, thin, proud posture, despite the limp log she dragged toward a chopping block. Her apron was stained dark. Her hands were wrapped in cloth. There were children behind her, small ones, watching, wary. The woman didn't look at him, just raised the axe with a practiced motion, then paused when it caught on the edge of the wood. She didn't swear, didn't complain, just tried again. He recognized that kind of strength. Quiet, tired. She chopped until the sun burned gold along the ridgeline, then wiped her hands on her skirt and turned toward the house. That's when their eyes met. Not long. A second, maybe 2. But enough. There was pain in her gaze. Not weakness, but something deeper. That kind of loneliness no one talks about. The kind that comes after hope is gone. Elijah tipped his hat. She didn't nod back. Just closed the door behind her. He didn't see her again that day. Spent the night at the livery wrapped in a blanket that smelled like mice. Slept light, woke early. Rode out past town just after dawn, not sure where he was going. But come evening he was back. Not because of her. Not really. Because there was something in that house at the edge of town that reminded him of himself. The way the shutters leaned. The smoke that barely curled from the chimney. The sound of children playing quiet enough to not disturb the silence. He stopped 50 yards from the fence. Didn't want to scare her. Watched as she stepped out again, this time carrying a pail and a bundle of sheets. She saw him. He raised one hand. She hesitated, then stepped toward the fence. Only a few paces. "Evenin'," he said. She looked him over, taking in the limp, the coat, the war still written in the lines of his face. "You're not from here." "No, ma'am." "You'll find it's not a kind place. I've been to worse." A long pause. "What do you want?" He could have said water. He could have said directions. But lies weren't something he carried anymore. Just saw a woman doing 3 men's work. Thought I might lend a hand. Her eyes narrowed. "You think I need help?" "No, ma'am." "I think we all do sometimes." She didn't answer right away. Looked back at the house. Heard a child cry out. Then silence again. "I don't got money," she said. "Didn't ask for any." She nodded once. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. "Name's Ellen." "Elijah." She studied him another beat, then stepped back, leaving the gate open behind her. He didn't follow yet, just watched the way she moved like someone who'd carried too much for too long. And maybe for the first time in years he felt the faintest shift inside. A thread pulled loose. A reason to stay, subscribe, and keep pace with the frontier. Ellen didn't speak much that first evening, and Elijah didn't push her to. He followed her to the shed behind the house where the woodpile leaned like it might collapse under its own weight. She pointed to the axe and went back inside. So he chopped. The rhythm steadied him, crack, split, toss. The air was dry, but sweat prickled his back. It felt like penance. Maybe it was. He didn't know for what exactly, things done, things not done. He just knew it was easier splitting logs than sleeping. When he finished, dusk had spread over the valley like cooling ashes. The sky burned low and wide, the cottonwoods throwing long shadows. He stacked the wood neatly by the door and knocked once before stepping back. Ellen opened it, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. "You hungry?" she asked. He hadn't eaten since morning. "I am." She nodded. "Come on then." Inside, the house smelled of beans, smoke, and soap. Simple, clean. The children sat quiet around the table. June gave him a long look but didn't speak. The boys squirmed a little, but Ellen didn't allow wildness. Not even in the young. They ate in near silence. He didn't mind. The beans were salty, the bread tough but fresh. It felt like a feast. Afterward, he helped gather the dishes without being asked. Ellen didn't thank him. But when she handed him a towel to dry their fingers brushed and she didn't pull away. That night he slept on a quilt near the stove. The floor was hard, the air cold. But the quiet in the house was different than what he was used to. It held a weight, yes, but not the hollow kind. It was the kind that says someone's still trying. In the morning he was up before the sun, stoking the fire before Ellen stirred. When she came into the room, tying her hair back with a scrap of linen, she didn't say a word. Just looked at the burning stove, then at him, and nodded. That became the shape of their days. He fixed a broken hinge on the shed, hauled water when the pump stuck, took the boys walking down to the creek and showed them how to skip stones. June watched him like she was waiting for something bad to happen, like she'd seen men come and go and all of them had left marks. Maybe he had marks too. Most folks did. One afternoon, as Ellen stitched a shirt by the window and the wind rattled the pane, Elijah said, "You sew for other folk." She looked up. "Used to." "Why'd you stop?" "Same reason most things stop. Folks stopped asking." He nodded. "Might be worth startin' again." She gave him a look. "You think I need your advice?" "No, ma'am," he said and smiled. "Just talking." Later, she brought him her husband's old shirt. The sleeves were worn, the collar torn. She didn't explain why she hadn't thrown it out, just handed it over and said, "You need better than that coat." He took it without speaking. That night, as he stitched the buttons back on, he thought about how grief hangs around in little ways. A shirt kept too long, a wedding cup on a shelf, silence at supper. Ellen never asked about his past. But one night, as the boys dozed and the fire hissed low, he said, "I was in Georgia when the war ended. I didn't go home after." She didn't look up from her mending. "Didn't figure I had one." Still, she didn't speak. But he felt something shift, a stillness between them that wasn't cold. Another day, they repaired the fence together. Her hands were strong, calloused. She didn't complain about the work. He liked that. Liked that she didn't try to soften what was hard. Just faced it. The children began to ask him things. Little things. Could he ride fast? Had he seen a bear? Did he know how to carve a whistle from willow bark? He showed them how patient and slow. June stayed back. But once she handed him a nail when he was mending a chair, just held it out, no words. He nodded. She nodded back. That was enough. Ellen watched it all. Quiet, wary. But each day her shoulders lowered a little, her voice eased. She even laughed once, just a breath of it, when Elijah spilled water on his boot trying to carry 2 pails. He didn't say anything about it, just smiled to himself. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was something smaller, truer. 2 people working beside each other, learning the weight of one another's silence. The spring crept in quiet and slow. No great blooms, no bright renewal, just a soft loosening of the frost, a little green pushing through brown. The kind of season you had to pay close attention to notice. Elijah did. He noticed how Ellen left the door unlatched in the mornings now, how she poured him coffee without asking. He noticed how June started humming when she swept the porch, and how the youngest boy Sam began reaching for his hand when they walked the ridge trail behind the house. One afternoon Elijah sat sharpening the blade of a hoe while Ellen patched a flour sack into a child's shirt. The air smelled of warm dirt and wood smoke. No one spoke. Then, without lifting her head, she said, "You plan on leaving?" He didn't look up from the blade. Hadn't decided. "You'll have to. Eventually. Maybe." She set her sewing down. "You got someone somewhere?" "No." "You run from something?" "Not anymore." The silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just full of all the things they hadn't said yet. "You came here with nothing," she said. He nodded. "I did. But you work like the place belongs to you." He looked at her then. "Don't need to own a thing to care for it." Her eyes searched his. He saw it again, that deep well of weariness, pride, and something else underneath. Something that hadn't died yet. That evening she told him about the night her husband left. No tears, just facts. He'd ridden off with a borrowed saddle and a borrowed horse. Said he'd send for them when he had work. No word had ever come. "I waited 6 months before I said it out loud," she said. "That he was gone." Elijah didn't answer. Just sat beside her on the step watching the horizon burn down. "I was angry," she said. "Still am some days. Got a right to be. But that don't feed 4 mouths." He nodded. "No, ma'am. It don't." The next day she asked him to take the wagon into town. The wheel needed fixing and she needed flour. He hesitated. "They'll look at you," she warned. "I've been looked at worse." She handed him a folded note with a list and some coins wrapped in linen. "Don't let them short you." The town hadn't changed. Men still spat on the boardwalk. Women still whispered behind gloved hands. Elijah tipped his hat to the blacksmith, who didn't return the gesture. At the general store, the clerk raised an eyebrow when he gave Ellen's name. "She still got them kids?" the man asked. "She still got her pride," Elijah said. The man smirked but said no more. Outside, Elijah passed a boy kicking stones in the street. He paused when he recognized him, Ellen's oldest boy, Charlie. The boy should been home. "You lost?" Elijah asked. Charlie shrugged, eyes on his boots. "She told you to wait?" Another shrug. Elijah crouched down. "You mad at her?" "No." "You mad at me?" Charlie didn't answer. "She makes you work hard." The boy nodded. "That's good." "She works hard, too." Charlie squinted up at him. "You staying?" Elijah studied the boy's face. So much like his mother's, tight-jawed, watchful. "I don't know yet," he said. "You want me to?" Charlie didn't answer. Just kicked another rock and started walking back toward the house. Elijah followed. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Ellen poured him a second cup of coffee. They sat outside under a thin veil of stars. "You think folks can change?" she asked. "I know they can," he said, "even if the world don't want them to. That's the only kind of change that matters." She was quiet a while. "I'm tired, Elijah." I know, but I'm not done. He nodded. I didn't think you were. She looked at him then fully plainly, like she was deciding something. Then stay, if you mean to. The words landed soft but solid. Not a question. Not a plea. He looked out over the land, dry but alive, tough but generous when worked with care. I will, he said. No promises. No need. Just two people sitting shoulder to shoulder with something almost like trust between them. Spring wore on, and with it came the first test of what they were building. The letters started showing up again, thin creased papers slipped under the door or nailed to the fence post. One from the county office, another from a name Ellen hadn't spoken in over a year, her husband's sister Ruth, a woman with sharp opinions and a voice that carried in every room she entered. The second letter said what Ellen already feared: Ruth was coming. Said the children weren't being raised right. Said a woman alone wasn't fit to raise 4 fatherless strays. Said she'd spoken to the preacher and to the sheriff. Elijah read it twice, then folded it slowly and handed it back. What'll you do? He asked. Ellen stared into the fire. What I always do. Hold my ground. But her voice didn't carry the usual weight. That night she barely touched her supper. She snapped at Charlie when he spilled milk and flinched when Sam coughed too long. Elijah didn't press her, just stayed close, chopping more wood than they needed, fixing the porch rail where no one would see it. Ruth arrived 2 days later, dressed like a widow in mourning and full of fire. She didn't knock, just marched right in and stood in the doorway like she owned the house. I'm taking them, she said. There's no shame in it. They need a proper home. Ellen stood between her and the children. They have one. Ruth glanced around at the lean pantry, the patched curtains, the dirt on the boys' feet. This is survival, not a home. Elijah stepped in from the yard, hands still dusty. You can leave. Ruth's eyes narrowed. And you are? I'm the one who's been here. Ruth scoffed. So now it's scandal and sin under this roof? No sin, Ellen said quietly. Only work. The sheriff came the next day. Said Ruth had filed papers. Said the preacher had raised concerns. It's not about what you've done wrong, he said, but folks see you living out here with a man not married and they start talking. Ellen clenched her jaw. They've been talking since he left. Since before. The sheriff shifted his hat in his hands. You could fight this, but it won't be clean. That night, Ellen didn't sleep. Elijah found her on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, eyes lost somewhere out past the cottonwoods. I won't let them take them, she whispered. They won't. You can't know that. No, but I know what we've built here. And I know they'll have to come through both of us to tear it down. She looked at him, then really looked. You'd fight for us. I already am. She leaned against him just slightly, just enough to let him feel her weight. In the days that followed, they prepared. Ellen wrote a statement. Elijah rode to the next town to speak with a schoolteacher who knew the children, who promised to testify if needed. June stood in the yard one morning and said, clear and quiet, I don't want to leave. Ellen's eyes filled then, not with fear but with something more dangerous, hope. The hearing was held in the town church. Ruth wore black again. She brought a lawyer, a man with a clean beard and no kindness in his eyes. He spoke of neglect, of impropriety, of futures ruined. Then Ellen stood. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She just told the truth. How she'd kept them fed. How she taught them to read by candlelight, to mend socks and tend to wounds. How Elijah had shown up not to claim something but to serve something. She paused, then looked directly at Ruth. You want them because they remind you he left. But I want them because they remind me to keep going. The silence after was heavy. The judge, an old man with cloudy eyes and a scar down his chin, cleared his throat. "You're no outlaw," he said. "You're a mother." He ruled in her favor. Ruth left that afternoon. Didn't say goodbye. Ellen didn't watch her go. Just knelt beside her children and whispered something that made June cry and Charlie nod with a clenched jaw. That night she sat on the porch with Elijah, the stars spread clean above them. She reached for his hand and didn't let go. "You still mean to stay?" she asked. "I do." "Then I need to tell you something." She took a breath, slow and full. "I'm not afraid anymore." And for the first time since the war, neither was he. Summer came in slow and golden, like a long-held breath finally exhaled. The days stretched wide and warm, and the children ran through them, barefoot, skin-browned, knees-scraped hair tangled by wind. The land gave just enough eggs from the hen's peas, from the vine wild berries, if you knew where to look. Ellen did. Elijah built a new fence, replaced the sagging boards with straight ones, strong ones, the kind that wouldn't let trouble slip through so easy. He taught Charlie how to use a level, how to listen for the pitch in the hammer's strike. It wasn't about the fence. It was never just about the work. Ellen took in sewing again. Word spread slow at first, but true. A farmer's wife sent her a torn quilt. Then the schoolteacher brought in a dress hem to be mended. Then came the preacher's wife, face tight with pride, handing over a bundle of worn shirts without saying more than 3 words. Ellen said nothing either, just nodded and did the job. She didn't smile much, but she carried herself different now. A little taller, a little steadier. Elijah watched her sometimes in the early hours, the way she moved through the morning light like a woman who had made peace with fire. They began to speak more openly in the evenings when the house was quiet. She asked about the war. Not the battles or the wounds, but the parts that stayed after, the way dreams would tilt sideways, the way trust felt like a thing too big to lift. He told her about the brother he'd lost, the letter he'd carried too long, the reason he'd wandered. She didn't fill the silence with sympathy, just sat with it beside him, sharing the weight. One night, as lightning flickered low behind the hills and thunder cracked like old bones, Ellen stepped close to him by the hearth. "I used to think I'd never want another man near me," she said. He didn't move. "I don't know what this is," she went on. "I don't know if it's right or proper or even smart." "Neither do I. But I'm not scared of it." He looked at her, and what he felt was not hunger or possession, but something gentler, something earned. He reached out, slow as the tide, and took her hand. "Me neither." The days after that fell into a rhythm that felt almost like a life. They didn't talk about marriage, not yet. Not because it wasn't on their minds, but because they both knew what promises cost. Better to build something quiet first, solid, lasting. The children began to call him Elijah less and Pa more. He never corrected them. One evening in late August, they all walked down to the creek, the air thick with the smell of cottonwood and warm stone. Ellen waded in with Sam on her hip, laughing when he splashed her, her skirt dark with water and sunlight catching the curve of her cheek. Elijah stood on the bank, his boots in his hands, watching her like a man who finally believed in tomorrow. Later, as the sky turned dusky and the frogs began to sing, Ellen leaned against his shoulder and said, "I want to build a room onto the house." "For you?" He looked down at her. "For me." She nodded. "And for us." He didn't speak for a moment, just wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close. It wasn't a proposal. Not exactly. But it was the kind that mattered more, because it meant permanence. It meant a place at the table, a cup waiting on the shelf, a name whispered into sleep. It meant that for all the things they'd lost, they'd found something real. Not grand, not perfect, but enough. The wedding was small, if you could even call it that. No white dress, no church bells, Just a Sunday morning with the mountains still blue in the distance and the air smelling of sagebrush and summer's end. June picked wildflowers and tied them with twine. Charlie stood stiff and proud, wearing Elijah's old boots that didn't quite fit. Sam clung to Ellen's leg, and the youngest Noah sat in the dirt drawing circles with a stick. The preacher didn't preach, just read a passage about steady hands and honest hearts, then stepped back. Ellen and Elijah faced each other, the wind tossing the ends of her braid his collar. No vows were written, nothing rehearsed, just words spoken low between two people who had seen each other through the worst. "I didn't know there'd be more," she told him. "There's more," he said. She placed her hand in his, not trembling, not unsure, just ready. When it was done, the preacher nodded and walked back toward town, boots crunching gravel, saying nothing. He'd done his part. The rest was theirs. They built the new room slowly, hammered the boards with care, made space not just for Elijah's things, but for his quiet, his stories, his need to sometimes sit and say nothing at all. Ellen made room for that. He in turn made space for her storms. She had them still nights when the past rose like a wave and held her under. Times when the children's coughs made her fingers shake. When the bills came in and the harvest looked thin, and she thought just for a moment that maybe she'd been foolish to believe she could have something good. But he never left the room. He sat with her through it. Let her speak or not. Let her cry or not. Just stayed. That winter Elijah built a rocking chair from leftover pine. On Christmas Eve he gave it to her with a single line carved into the seat. "You stayed." She ran her fingers over the words, then looked at him with tears that didn't fall. In the spring she told him she was carrying. She said it quiet over bread dough and boiling water. Just looked up and said, "I think we'll need a second cradle." He didn't speak right away. Just reached for her hand, pressed it to his lips, and closed his eyes. The house filled out over the months, not just with things but with living. The children learned to laugh without flinching. They grew taller, stronger. June started writing stories in a notebook she kept under her pillow. Charlie learned to plow. Sam took to drawing. And Noah, he followed Elijah everywhere, mimicking his gait with pride. The townsfolk changed too, slowly. Some never came around. Others stopped whispering. And a few, just enough, started to nod hello when Ellen passed by, or left eggs at the gate when the hens stopped laying. One of them, the same store clerk who once questioned Elijah's place, brought over a satchel of nails and said, "Heard you're adding a port." Ellen took the nails without comment. But when the man turned to go, she said, "Thank you." By the time the baby came, another boy, red-faced and fierce. The house felt full in a way she'd never imagined it could. She named him Jesse after her father. Elijah held him like he was something holy. That night, Ellen sat in the rocker, the newborn swaddled against her chest, and listened to the fire crackle. The older children were asleep, the wind soft through the windows, the stars clean and clear. Elijah knelt beside her and laid a hand on her knee. "You happy?" he asked. She looked down at Jesse, then at the man beside her. At the house they had built with grit and grace and work, not luck. "I am," she said. It wasn't perfect. It was hard still. The land remained unforgiving, the town not always kind. But it was theirs. And in the hush of that moment, with a child sleeping on her chest and a man who'd walked through fire to find her at her side, Ellen Braithwaite knew she had done more than survive. She had endured. She had risen. She had made a life. Stay on the long ride. Subscribe today.